15,000 feet beneath the surface of the Atlantic, in a cold and total darkness that sunlight has never reached. A small orange machine sat on the seafloor for months, holding a secret. It was a recorder, the kind every large ship carries, a black box bolted to the top of the vessel it belonged to, and it had kept, on a loop, the last 26 hours of a bridge full of people, their voices, their instruments, the weather reports they read aloud, the decisions they made and the ones they argued over. The ship it came from was 3 miles above it, in pieces, on the same black floor. 33 people had been aboard, and not one of them survived. This is the story of how a modern American cargo ship, with a satellite link and a professional crew, and the entire United States Weather Service available to it, sailed directly into the eye of a hurricane. And it is the story of why, when investigators finally understood what had happened, the most haunting detail was not the storm. It was that the crew had said, out loud, that they should turn. The ship was called El Faro, Spanish for the lighthouse. She was a cargo ship, 40 years old, and she ran a steady, unglamorous line out of Jacksonville, Florida, down to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and back, carrying containers and cars and trailers, a floating supply line for an island. She was operated by a shipping company called Tote, and she was captained by an experienced mariner named Michael Davidson. On the last day of September in 2015, she loaded her cargo and left Jacksonville on a crossing. Her cruise had made hundreds of times. The only complication that evening was a tropical storm out near the Bahamas, a system the forecasts said was middling and moving away. Its name was Joaquin. To plan his way around the weather, the captain relied on a tool that most ships of that era used, a shore-based service that packaged up the forecasts and sent them out to the vessel, laying the storm's predicted track onto the ship's charts. It was a good product, but it had one quiet, fatal quality. It arrived on a delay. By the time a weather package reached the bridge and the captain sat down to plan against it, the picture it showed was already old. In this case, by something like half a day. And half a day, for a hurricane, is a very long time. While the captain was routing his ship against a storm that was supposed to be modest and drifting away, the real Joaquin, out in the dark, was doing the opposite. It was slowing down, turning, and rapidly getting stronger. The map he was steering by was describing a storm that no longer existed. And here is the part that the recorder would later make so hard to hear. The captain was not alone on that bridge. He had officers, mates, who stood the watches through the night while he slept. And those officers had access to newer information, the fresher forecasts coming straight from the National Hurricane Center. And what those showed was alarming. The storm was strengthening, and El Faro's course was carrying her closer and closer to it. Through the night, the mates did what good officers do. They raised it. They suggested carefully, in the deferential language sailors use with a captain, that maybe they should alter course, take a longer way south, put more distance between the ship and the growing storm. And the captain, working from his older, calmer picture and confident in his own long experience, kept to his plan. The gap between what the bridge crew feared and what the captain decided is the whole tragedy, and it has a technical name in the reports: ineffective bridge resource management. In plain words, the people who were right could not move the person in charge. By the early hours of the 1st of October, there was no more ambiguity. El Faro was in it. Joaquin had become a major hurricane, and the ship was now close to its center, in seas that no 40-year-old cargo vessel was built to survive. The wind was screaming, the waves were enormous, and the ship, loaded with heavy cargo, began to do the thing that dooms a vessel in that situation. She took on a list, a lean to one side that would not come back. We know what the bridge sounded like in those hours because the recorder kept running. It is, investigators have said, one of the most harrowing recordings of its kind, not because it is dramatic, but because it is so human. There is no panic for most of it. There is a professional crew doing their jobs in worsening conditions, reading instruments, adjusting, reassuring one another. Right up until the point where reassurance runs out, you can hear the captain, still projecting calm and command. And you can hear, underneath it, the growing understanding of the people around him that this was very wrong, and that it was too late to be anywhere else. The list was the beginning of the end, because it set off a chain. Somewhere low in the ship, a watertight cover, a scuttle, had been left open, and with the vessel leaning and the sea coming aboard, water began to fill a cargo hold. The list grew worse. And then the list did something mechanical and merciless. It starved the ship's engine of oil. The main engine depended on a steady supply of lubricating oil, and at that steep, sustained angle, the oil could no longer reach where it needed to go. The engine had to be shut down, and in that moment, El Faro lost the one thing that might still have saved her, the ability to steer, to turn her bow into the waves and hold on. Without propulsion, a ship in a hurricane is not a ship anymore. She is a hull, turned broadside to the sea, being rolled. The last messages from El Faro went out in the pre-dawn dark. The captain reported that the ship had lost propulsion, that she was listing badly, that water was coming in, and that he had finally ordered the crew to muster and prepare to abandon ship. It was by then an order that could not be carried out. You cannot launch an old open lifeboat into a hurricane. You cannot survive in that water. Sometime after 7 in the morning, near Crooked Island in the Bahamas, El Faro went down, bow first, into water 15,000 feet deep, and took all 33 of her people with her, 28 Americans and 5 Polish workers who had been aboard for the ship's maintenance. It was the worst American cargo shipping disaster in more than 3 decades. What followed was extraordinary. The families demanded to know why, and so did the government, and the search for answers led to the bottom of the ocean. Using a Navy ship and a deep-sea robot from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, investigators located the wreck 3 miles down, and then went back and did something almost no one thought was possible. They found the tiny recorder in the debris field and recovered it, intact, from 15,000 feet. When they played it back, it confirmed in the crew's own voices what the data already suggested. Federal investigators laid out the cause plainly. The captain's insufficient action to avoid the hurricane, his failure to use the most current weather information, and his late decision to muster the crew. But they did not stop at the captain. They faulted the shipping company too, for weak oversight, for a safety system that did not catch the risk, for sending a 40-year-old ship with open lifeboats into hurricane season without the guidance and the culture that might have questioned that decision. No one was ever criminally charged. What changed were the rules about weather routing, about recorders, about who, on a bridge, is allowed to be heard. Which is why El Faro is not really a story about a storm, or even about one captain's stubborn night. It is a story about trusting a picture of the world that has quietly gone out of date. The captain was not a fool, and he was not reckless in the way we like our villains to be. He was a professional, working diligently from the information in front of him, information that looked authoritative and was wrong, because the world had moved on while the map stood still. We do this now more than ever. We navigate our lives, our money, our decisions by dashboards and feeds and forecasts that feel current and often are not. And we trust the confident picture over the nervous voice in the room. The El Faro question is the one worth keeping. Not, is the data good, but is it still true? And whether anyone who can see the storm feels able to say so. But the postmortem writes itself. The only question is whether anyone reads it before the next one.